It's Veritas Forum with Dr. Craig Johnson, professor in residence of Chalcedon Christian Academy and pastor of Bethel Christian Fellowship in Agora Hills.
Welcome to Veritas Forum. My name is Craig Johnson. My guest is James Patrick Holding, president of Tecton Apologetics. He's the author of Shattering the Christ Myth, The Mormon Defenders, and The Impossible Faith. Welcome, JP.
Thank you, Craig.
Let's talk about biblical illiteracy. I know one of your favorite topics. There's a crisis in the church. Tell us about it.
Okay, this is one that's guaranteed to make me blow my stack, because I've seen this happen over and over again so many times to so many people. And unless we do something about it, one scholar, Daniel Wallace, has said that we have less than 50 years before America is like Europe in terms of the way the churches are. And if you've been to Europe, do you know what it's like over there?
Yes.
I mean, the churches are turned into museums. The Christians comprise perhaps 2% of the population. Now, that's not to say we're without hope, because in third world countries, Christianity is exploding. But we don't want to be like Europe is now either way. That's not what we want.
What's the antidote to biblical illiteracy?
Antidote to biblical illiteracy. Well, let's just start by getting to the root cause of it. What causes the problems in the first place? And I've broken this down into 7 basic steps that I've seen repeated time and time again. The first thing is simply neglect on the part of churches in terms of educating people in the basics of our faith. They don't explain to them why they should believe what they believe, other than perhaps in terms of a vague feeling, like I have Jesus in my heart. Now, we don't hear about things like what I've written about in my books. We don't hear about things like people saying that Jesus didn't exist. We don't hear about things like people saying that the Gospels are not authentic, or Paul didn't write half the letters that have his name on them, or that events recorded in the Bible never actually happened as reported. Instead, what these churches have fallen for in many cases is this idea of entertainment and indulgence. Now, there was a church near me that I offered to teach at one time, and I never heard back from them. But I did see at one point they decided to host a skateboard demonstration by a Christian skateboarding group. Now, maybe they have some success in evangelism, but what kind of attitude does that suggest towards educating their people?
Skating around the issue.
Skating around the issue. Jesus saves, dude. That's an excellent message to keep you going. And so what we have here, they would rarely consider inviting a teacher, such as you or I, much less someone like a seminary professor, to come and talk about their faith and to explain why they should believe Christianity. And I suspect this is because many pastors feel threatened by someone like that. They're afraid that they'll come in and correct them or say something that they can't handle. And that leads to stage 2. Because our typical churchgoer is not educated in these matters, when they first time see something like someone claiming that Jesus didn't exist or what have you, they're completely caught off guard. What's their reaction going to be if they've never heard this before? Why didn't my pastor tell me about this? Why didn't my deacons tell me about this? Why didn't my family tell me about this? And for many people, they can brush it off very easily. But many more people are going to start asking questions about that.
So if they see Religulous, or they see the movie Zeitgeist, or the movie The God Who Wasn't There, they have no armor whatsoever.
Precisely.
No protection. And so the emotional response might be they throw their faith off altogether.
Precisely. That's the third stage. They start having questions. They wonder what's going on. They see something like Religulous for the first time. It's like going into a battle with a medieval knight buck naked. That's exactly a good analogy right there. So then we have in the fourth step, once they go to someone like their pastors or like their Sunday school teachers, these people cannot answer their questions. Now, you're a pastor yourself, and perhaps you know of this kind of thing. I know of people who have gone to seminary, and they tell me that most of the students there are looking for degrees in counseling, in preaching, but not in things like biblical exegesis. You may get 1 or 2 courses in that, but they're mainly looking to become counselors when they become pastors. They are not looking to become someone who can answer people's questions. Okay? And likewise, your average Sunday school teacher, your average deacon, they're no more getting involved in this either. You might have the occasional hobbyist who's interested in something like this, but for the most part, someone who comes with a question about a film like Religulous or about the Christ myth idea, they'll be told something like, well, questioning is evil, you're not showing adequate faith, you just need to show your faith, you just need to continue to believe, and that's it. And that's not going to be sufficient. That's not going to answer these people's questions.
Now, when the movie Zeitgeist came out, and all of a sudden there's a declaration that Christ is just a copycat of Mithras or Dionysus or Osiris, and other religions in the world have dying and resurrecting gods, and you in your book Shattering the Christ Myth dismantle that and demonstrate it's not true. None of the claims are true. But I would not have any guard. My 12-year-old son would not necessarily have any point of reference and would have no one to go to with
Precisely.
regard to that. And that field is a very narrow, scholarly area of expertise. So we are in a crisis.
Precisely. You don't just pick this stuff up at Walden Books. And it's not in the manga section. It's not where all the stuff is that everyone's going to read. Daniel Steele is not writing about it either. So the next step is related to the problem we're having in the church, and that is in the public sector, in the secular world, we are not being taught critical thinking skills, and we're being taught to be tolerant of all sources. Everyone's opinion is as good as anyone else's, especially when it comes to religion. And we have sources like Wikipedia that anyone will readily believe. And so the society at large is teaching our people to be uncritical, and they are following along in that. Now, number 6. These people who are looking at these things for the first time continue to investigate, hoping to find out more information. They come across literature written by cynics and skeptics that are saying more of the same thing. Now, the reality is that this literature is no more informed than any other literature they've been reading before. It's no more informed than Religulous or anyone who writes about the Christ myth and supports it. But because all our people have is what they might call common sense, and that's all these people have that they're reading, they will simply accept what they're saying and think, that guy makes a good point. And they can't find any problem with what they're saying because they're not well educated enough. The example I like to use is the claim that some skeptics will make, well, we don't have the originals of the New Testament. They're just copies of copies of copies, and who knows how badly they've been corrupted. Well, as we talked about before, when some of these secular scholars deal with the classic works of ancient literature, they don't have the originals of those either. But they're not running around scared about that, and they're not making an issue of it. But the average person will not know this, and they will think it's a big deal that we don't have what Paul originally wrote, and they won't know any better, and so they will continue to worry about it. And by that time, we get to step 7. By the time they get to this stage, where their doubt is so strong, it's useless to provide them with any information from credible authorities. Someone like a Bruce Metzger or a Daniel Wallace, who is an expert in the subject of the text and why it is not a problem that we don't have the originals. By the time you bring this to someone at this level of doubt, they'll think that this is someone just making excuses for what is obviously a huge problem. And then they will fall into the trap of thinking, well, obviously you're trying to hide something. This is a conspiracy. You didn't teach me this when I was growing up. Therefore, I need to give this up. And so they think that we're just offering some desperate effort to solve a real problem, not realizing there isn't a problem at all. And by that time, it is often too late to get through to someone, and you have someone who may be a full-fledged apostate.
Now, you, in a previous program, had read some you called anti-testimonies,
Yes.
which are heartbreaking. You mentioned 2 or 3 of them, of people who were 49 years serving the Lord in church, and they run across Religulous or Zeitgeist or The God Who Wasn't There or read a Richard Dawkins book, and they think this is all new stuff, and they have no guard against it, and they renounce their faith. That's heartbreaking.
Yes, and we have former pastors who have done that as well. It's a big market out there. It makes a lot of money for some of these former pastors to write these kiss and tell books. It's been going on for quite a while. I mean, Dawkins wasn't the first new atheist out there, and Dan Barker is an example of a former pastor, but he wasn't the first either. There's many of these coming out more and more every day, and especially with self-publishing the way it is, where you can spend $1,000 and publish your own book. So many of these people can just share their dirty laundry with the world and say, this is why I doubt. I think one of the more clear examples lately that really touched me, and I wrote a review in the Christian Research Journal about it, was a book by a fellow named Gary Lanier. Now, have you ever heard of Gary Lanier?
Just from your review.
Okay. Now, he was a Christian heavy metal rock musician, and I believe he won some Dove Awards, and he was very well known. And one day he got into some of this free-thinking literature, and now he's a full-fledged atheist. And he decided to self-publish a book in which he laid out his dirty laundry. The mistakes he makes are incredible. I mean, he just simply read something like Thomas Paine, the early American freethinker, and accepted it at face value. His mistakes are embarrassing in just how bad they are. He likes to say, for example, that the Council of Nicaea decided the New Testament books. He repeats that numerous times. It's completely false. It's taken from Paine, who made the same mistake. Nicaea had nothing to do with the formation of the New Testament. So you see what's happening here. You see, these people do not know any better, and then they spread their not knowing better around to other people who unfortunately don't know any better. And it's just like a domino effect. More and more people come to disbelieve for the same reason.
But if we trace the fruit to the root, if we are able to fight for a literate church a people who understand why they believe what they believe, a people who are biblically literate and are aware of the stories of the Bible. This should be an encouragement for pastors to do what? What would you encourage pastors to do?
We have several levels of things that they can do, and just to frame the problem of why they need to do it, let me just quantify this exactly. There was an excellent item by Michael Patton on the Reclaiming the Mind blog, in which he pointed out that 31 million Americans have left the church to find answers elsewhere in the past few years. That's a significant number. I mean, the population of America is what, 275 million? That's over 10% of our people leaving the church. And so, yeah, we have a serious problem, and we need to take some steps. So let's talk about some of these steps that I've come up with for people to resolve the crisis, starting with what you don't need to be doing, okay? You don't need to be continuing with the church programs that are not working, okay? You don't need to be doing all the entertainment ministries, the skateboard demonstrations, the extra music and whatnot. You can do some of that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that, but don't make it your sole purpose. Don't make it all that you do, okay? Yeah. Stop with all the gimmicks, okay? All these evangelism gimmicks. Like, have you seen those evangicubes? You know, those things. I can never get the picture right on one side there, you know. I can never get that to work properly. Yeah. Again, those have their place. That's fine, but don't make that your only resource. It's time to put these things on our Sunday morning services. You know, I've dealt with many pastors who want to shove things like this away on Wednesday night or Sunday night, or if you still have Sunday night services in some cases, they want to shove it off on some special Thursday night thing. That's not going to do it. You know, you need to at least talk about it in the Sunday morning service when everyone's there, because many of these people are not going to hear about it otherwise. You know, like my own pastor right now, he very willingly, when I did a presentation on religulous for my church, he promoted it in all 3 services at our church. That was great. And that's exactly what we need to be doing. And so we need to make sure that we bring attention to these things and not just shove it off in a corner somewhere when we make our presentations.
You know, I did a series called Mere Christianity. It was a 15-week series, detailed arguments for the existence of God, the deity of Christ, and it was the most well-attended, most well-received, and we sold more tape copies of that message than any other time. Pastors sometimes are afraid if we get too deep, we're going to go over people's heads. People are starving to death. We need to raise the standard and cause their hunger to rise to a level of competence.
You're right. There's an analogy someone gave, I think was applied to children, like if you only feed them Hostess ding-dongs, that's all that they will eat. And they won't realize that you've got steak they can eat too. They're not scared of steak. You're just not giving it to them. I had a gentleman in one of my Sunday school classes who I like to use as an example. He said, you know, I don't understand what you're talking about all the time, but you fire me up to go and find out more about what you're saying. I believe more people will be willing to do that. Yeah, we've got some people who are lazy intellectually, who always want to be the tail in the body of Christ and just sit around, and they're going to object to you bringing this stuff to the fore. But we don't need to listen to those people. You know, what do you think Jesus would have done to a disciple who said, "Master, can you make that a lot simpler for me, please, or shorten your message a little? You know, I think Bonanza's coming on in a few minutes, and I want to be there when it comes on." You know, get out from in front of the TV. The couch potatoes are not blessed. Let's get to work with discipleship. And so we need to institute a thorough reform in the way we educate people in the church. We need to start forming educational programs, okay? I like what Michael Patton, the fellow from Reclaiming the Mind, says. The church has been on an intellectual diet for the last century, and we are suffering from theological atrophy. What else do you expect when we have replaced theological discipleship with a gluttonous promotion of entertainment, numbers, and fast food Christianity that can produce nothing more than a veneer of faith seasoned for departure? 10 miles wide, an inch deep. That's what we're talking about. Just going for the crowds. Feed them ding-dongs, they'll show up every time.
So we can deepen the foundation of our people, and we can also be a draw to a hungry and thirsty culture, because people are obviously hungry and thirsty. They're searching in the East. They're now searching. It seems the pendulum goes from a naturalism, an atheistic kind of position ditch, or it goes all the way over into Eastern mysticism and pure subjectivity. People are hungry, or they wouldn't be searching. There wouldn't be 30 million Christians going somewhere else.
That's right. Now they've got to find. People want to find a solution. You know, something that makes the big picture and helps them understand what it is. Even if it's eventually atheism they go to, they at least have the answer. They're not going to be settled with just no answer whatsoever. Maybe a few people can, But overall, still people as a whole are going to look for some overarching unified theory, shall we say, of existence that explains their purpose or lack thereof. And so we need to be able to present that to them and be ready.
So present a coherent Christian worldview, a worldview that embraces all the particulars of life and fits all the particulars into this bigger scope, rather than just giving them bits and pieces of truth. So would you recommend that pastors constantly keep the people aware of the big picture?
Yes, I would. I've had some ideas for how to test your church to see whether they're with the program. Now, understand, of course, it varies according to how large your church is and what kind of resources they have. I'm not saying that every little church with 10 members needs to do all these things. When you have smaller churches, you may have to cooperate with other smaller churches and pool your resources. But here are some general guidelines that I've come up with. And we have some great opportunities in this day and age for showing whether a particular church is healthy in this regard. Ask yourself the question, did your church do anything about stuff like religulous? Did it do anything about the Da Vinci Code when that was out? In fact, Da Vinci Code is an even better marker because that one was huge. That was a novel as well as a movie.
And you did one of the first critiques of that.
Yes, I did. I did one of the first critiques of that for the Christian Research Journal and on the site. And so that's the thing, you had to be on top of that. I mean, people were finding in surveys that those who had read Da Vinci Code were more likely to believe the claims made in it than those who hadn't. So this just because it was fiction doesn't mean that no one was believing it. They were believing it, obviously. Next question, what are they doing about it and when are they doing it? As I said, are they going to do it Sunday morning or at least do something Sunday morning to bring notice to it? I mean, are they hiding it off on some side day when no one shows up? One of the saddest moments, I think, was in an earlier church I was in when they had me do the teaching on a Saturday. I was like, that's not a good day, but I went ahead and took it. Well, they had, at the same time, in the same building, photograph day. And it was a special day when you could bring your dog to be photographed with you. More people showed up to have their dog photographed with them than showed up for my class. Now, what does that tell you about that church? That's pretty sad.
They're barking up the wrong tree.
They're barking up the wrong something. It's a dog of a church. That's what it tells you. Here's another guideline. Now, let's say you go up to your pastor and try to talk about something like the Da Vinci Code or religulous or what have you, or maybe some issue of biblical interpretation. What happens when you talk to them about it? Do they try to engage you? Do they say, well, that's a good thing, I don't know anything about it, but let me look it up? Or do their eyes sort of glaze over like the deer in the headlights kind of deal, right? Okay? The first two options are okay. But if you get that third option, where the eyes glaze over and it's like they're going to be run over by a truck, you're in a big problem situation right there with that church. The last guideline I like to look at is, are they more concerned with entertaining than with teaching? Now, I say this, I'm not talking about does your church use stuff like PowerPoint presentations, because it's very good to use things like that. We have people who learn differently. I learn mostly by reading. There are other people who learn visually. They like to have some kind of picture up there to help them remember things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about some church service where they do nothing but this stimulation 24/7 when they do their presentations. That's all you see. It's all meant to titillate or to entertain or to make you feel good. And that's all it is. They don't have any meat, all they have is milk. That's the third guideline I have. And with those three guidelines, you have a good way of testing whether or not your church is in a position to be healthy with this. And as I say, if your church is smaller, struggling to pay the electric bill, that's a different matter. You might have to co-op with other churches. But these are things generally that you can look at.
Now, when we talk about biblical illiteracy, we see this in the culture at every level.
Yes,
we are looking at Christian television, we're listening to Christian radio, we have the attention span of a gnat as a culture. I mean, USA Today and most of the papers are writing at a 6th grade level.
Yes.
So it seems like the entire culture in this information age is cutting down our ability to think critically, not valuing critical thinking. We did a whole program on critical thinking and how we can evaluate sources, resources, and so on. Doesn't it seem the whole culture is giving us trouble?
Oh, certainly. Well, in the biblical side, we have people who believe that the Sermon on the Mount was delivered on horseback. And we have people who think that Joan of Arc was Noah's wife. In the secular world, the same thing is happening. For my book, Shattering the Christ Myth, Mike Licona of the North American Mission Board, who is also a prolific author, wrote the foreword for me. And he noted that there was a survey done in the United Kingdom where they found that many people in this day and age think that Winston Churchill didn't exist and that Sherlock Holmes did. So clearly, this is not just the church that's having a problem. This reflects a wider problem in society as a whole.
So we talked about Wikipedia, Google, and people not being critical about sources they're reading, and also losing a taste for study.
Yes.
And searching out issues and wanting a soundbite with regard to that. Well, sound bites aren't education.
No, they're not. No. Only a soundbite issue can give you soundbite education. Something very simple. But the issues are far more complex these days. And actually, ironically, the lack of knowledge makes the issues more complex, because we don't have the background needed, and we need to be informed from square one in many cases about many of these issues. We need to start at a much more basic level. When you have people who think the four Gospels were Martin, Luther, Mark, and John, obviously you're starting at a much lower level to educate someone like that than you would with someone who at least knows what the titles are and what's in them.
So we're not living in the 1930s. We have to do prolegomena now. We've got to go way back, okay, to Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God. Okay, well, let's move back a little bit further. I mean, we're having to do almost a pre-evangelism presentation now to find out where people are in the mall of their life, right?
Yes, we are. We're having to go way back to square -32, not square one, -32. That's how bad it can be.
I remember Vince Lombardi used to open every football season by saying, "Gentlemen, this is a football." They knew that, but with regard to biblical literacy, there's a lot of people that don't know. This is the Bible. This is God's Word. It's not one book. It's 66 books, and there's 39 in the Old and 27 in the New. The things that are basic to some seminary students are not common to Christian television, Christian radio. Does it irritate you? We're not going to mention any names because we're for anybody that's trying to proclaim the gospel, but does it bother you as a critical scholar to see what's passed off as teaching, Bible teaching?
It irritates me to no end. Absolutely.
Do you throw shoes at the TV or holy water? Or?
No, I let my dog bark at him. So he'll take care of them. No, I just write an article or something like that. This is my crusade. This is why I am doing what I'm doing. It is my motivation to get our people educated, to get the message out to them. If we have to start at the basic level, that's fine. We'll gradually grow them up to the level they need to be. Some people are perfectly happy knowing that the answers are out there and that's sufficient. Other people need more information. I want to be able to provide whatever level of information that they need.
Now, you're president of Tecton Apologetics, and what's the word tecton mean?
Tecton is the Greek word used in the New Testament to describe Jesus' profession on earth, and normally we translate that as carpenter. In reality, the profession usually involved working with stone as well. So it's also, I guess you could call him a handyman, more like a building handyman. So what I did with my website was I chose that with the theme Building Blocks for Christian Faith as the name for the ministry. And then for the website itself, the website address is Tektonics, TEKTONICS.org. I had to add the ICS because Tecton.org had already been taken by someone else, some Catholic ministry that did trips to Medjugorje or something. I don't know what that has to do with Tectons. But they had taken that, so I had to add the ICS, and then the .org indicates that it's a nonprofit organization.
So you are giving reasons for faith. That's what you do.
Yes.
1 Peter 3:15 says, "Be ready always to give an answer to everyone, a reason of the hope that lies within you, with meekness and reverence." You're giving the truth, you're speaking it in love, you're being respectful of others, but you're providing information for pastors to go to and for students of Scripture to go to. Isn't there not a lot of satisfaction in that?
There is, and there are also people who are beyond the point where you can help them, and at that point you do sometimes have to let loose and not be as kind to them as you would ordinarily be. But for honest inquiries, which is the majority of the people I deal with in reality, although you might hear otherwise from other people, the majority of people, I'm just here to give them the honest answers that they're looking for.
Now, this ministry is 10 years old?
Yes. 10 years old as far as being online, 7 years old in terms of being an organization.
And how many articles are on that site?
Somewhere between 1,500 and 1,600 if you count even like the small single paragraph articles.
So I'm telling you, any of our viewers that have Bible questions, that have questions about the authority of Scripture, that have questions about cultural attacks, skeptical attacks, atheist attacks, you have articles on practically every subject or references to other sites and friends of yours that deal particularly in these areas. We are to defend, as Jude 3 says, the faith that was once delivered to the saints,
Yes.
That was a mandate 2,000 years ago. It's a mandate in our time. And just as we're closing this program, how would you encourage the pastors? Because they have a hard job. They have a rough job. They're dealing with real people, real issues, real needs. They're dealing with congregants that are sheep that are trying to run the shepherd, telling the shepherd how to run the church.
Right.
How could you encourage them as we finish our last 2 minutes?
Target painted on their back. I know what you mean. I would recommend in this condition, if a pastor has not had the education necessarily, that he be willing to delegate to someone who does that. I have told pastors before with varying results, let me teach that class for you. Let me preach a sermon once in a while so that you can take that Sunday to do something else. You can handle counseling people, and don't be afraid to delegate to some of your other pastors as well. Some churches have more of a staff than others. They can delegate to other people. Don't hold on to that like some kind of precious thing. Be willing to get help from other people. That's my advice to them.
So it's not bad to have not have an education. It's not bad to be not theologically trained in a professional way.
No.
It's just to know how to delegate to the people that are that mouthpiece. But aren't we the body of Christ?
Yes.
The eyes, the ears, the nose, we all have a different function, and it doesn't mean one is greater than another.
No, it doesn't.
It just means that we need to lean upon one another and be interdependent.
That's right. And don't be afraid to rely on the ear to do something that it can do best. Don't try to do everything yourself. Don't micromanage.
James Patrick Holding, listen to what he's saying. President of Tecton Apologetics, author of Shattering the Christ Myth, my favorite book in the last 5 years. I'd encourage you to go to Amazon and look it up. We want to thank him for his time. Thank you, JP.
Greg.
Continue the great work that you're doing. And remember, be ready always to give an answer for the reason of the hope that lies within you with meekness and reverence. That's 1 Peter 3:15. It says that people are to look at our lives first and foremost. They're to see something attractive, something that draws them, an aroma, a fragrance. They're to see our walk with Christ. And secondly, they're going to ask us questions. And when they ask us questions, we can't know everything about everything, but we can know something. Or at best, we can know where to refer people. And that's why we're doing these programs with James Patrick Holding, because Tecton Apologetics has the answers and it has the building blocks with regard to the Christian faith that can give you a foundation and lead you in the direction of a good Bible-believing church that knows why they believe what they believe. Until next time, this is Craig Johnson saying God bless you. Thank you, JP.
Thank you.